Welcome to the StoryLens Podcast, where your story is our focus. We explore wealth, legacy, and purpose through a process that starts with deep listening and leads to one-of-a-kind strategies. At StoryOne, we believe the best planning begins with you.
Welcome back to the StoryLens Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Again, quick pitch up front. If you can like or subscribe, share this with your friends. Super helpful to us, and we appreciate it. So once again, we have our friend Evan Lange. If you have not tuned in before, Evan is a dear friend and has worked in the charitable space for a long time. Grew up in Missouri, went to William Jewell, then went on to UMKC to attend law school, worked for a few firms around town, and then has spent over a decade in the charitable space, most of that time at the Signatory, and has helped a lot of families with charitable design, charitable planning, presale gifts. And now he's doing some stuff under his own banner called 5-Star Legacy, consulting with families on charitable design and giving. And so really excited to have him here today. Of course, we got John Christensen and myself. So we're going to get a little bit into details today, into some of the technical side of giving, and really going to think through, like, a lot of times when we intersect families, it is because they're about to have a liquidity event of some kind. Some big change is going to happen. If they're in the real estate, they want to liquidate their real estate portfolio. If they own a business, they're thinking about gifting or just selling the business. And so it's a great opportunity to think about a pre-sale gift. And so we're going to wade into the details there. And then we're also going to kind of think through what happens as a follow-on in those decision-making processes. So maybe just to get started, Evan, pre-sale gifts, for some people, it's something they know well and they've heard about it for some time. But I think, as we've all experienced, there's some business owners that give us a call 6 months after they sell their business and they're like, hey, great, let's work together. Let's give some money away. We're like, oh my goodness, we just missed a huge opportunity. So tell me a little bit about some of the pre-sale gifts that you've been part of. As people come to the table and start thinking about it, where do you begin your process?
Yeah. And John, Cameron, thank you for having me back to the podcast. So the first one must have been successful that I'm back. So
it was so good.
Appreciate that. That's so great. Good. I'm glad to be
so
back.
Many hits. So many hits.
I mean, that's what I was going for. Yeah. Appreciate that. The question, as far as pre-sale gifts, the good thing is I am a simple person from Missouri, so I'm just going to go down very simple. So when we talk about pre-sale gifts, these are gifts of assets, business interest, real estate, things like that if you were to sell that asset, you're going to have to pay capital gains tax on the appreciation of that. So if you bought something for $100, it's now selling for $1,000 and you sell it, you have to pay tax on that $900 gain that's there. So basically what we try to say is, instead of selling that, let's look at giving that asset to a charitable vehicle. That could be a donor-advised fund, private foundation, those things. But if you give that asset instead of selling it, you get a tax deduction for the fair market value. So that means the amount that it would sell for, $1,000 in this example. And when the charity sells it, they avoid all the taxes on the sale. So it's kind of two tax benefits. So yeah, to your point, there are people that will sell a business and they'll go, okay, now I want to give money away. Well, if they would have done the gift of actually shares of their company, and that can be privately held companies, LLCs, S Corps, C corporations.
Limited partnerships. All those, we have lots of.
There is an alphabet soup of different business entities, but you can actually give a portion of that away before you sell it. And again, that same tax benefit, you're getting a tax deduction for the asset value, and then you avoid the capital gains. And that's really the kind of secret sauce, if you would. But Cameron, as you said, the timing of it is important. You have to do this before you sell it.
And not to, your example of $1,000 illustrates it perfectly. Yeah. But realistically, a pre-sale gift can at times save millions of dollars in taxes if it's done prior to sale versus post sale.
Yeah,
so it's meaningful.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example of this. When I was working at the foundation, we had lots of people make year-end gifts. So a donor-advised fund, if your audience doesn't know what a donor-advised fund is, basically it is just an account that you set up at a 501c3. There's lots of these around town in Kansas City or nationally. Signatory, where I used to work, is a great one. National Christian Foundation, Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. There's lots of different donor-advised fund groups. But it's just an account that you set up. It's the Cameron Bond Charitable Fund. And then you can put assets or money into that account and get a tax deduction for it. And then you recommend grants out of it to the charities that you want whenever you want to. Yep. The real benefit, though, and sometimes is at year end, you can put money in that account. You get a tax deduction for that year. So we had a donor when this is a person that walked off the street on December 31st into our office in Olathe, and they had a check. And they said, hey, I want to open a donor advised fund. And we're like, okay, we take checks. Well, that check was for $5 million, which, I mean, I know you get a lot of big checks, but I don't typically write $5 million checks. Yeah. And so we're like, okay, like this guy, he had no connection to us. He just found out about us. And he found out from us from a CPA, actually. And so we said, well, congratulations. You got a tax deduction. It's December 31st in the afternoon. You got a tax deduction for $5 million. And so we asked him, what happened? Yeah. And he goes, well, my CPA was looking at my tax projections, and I sold a business earlier this year. And he said I really needed a tax deduction. So here's this check. And my heart just sank because I go, oh, man. If you would have gave the same amount percentage-wise in stock in your company before the sale happened, he probably would have had like $7 million in his donor advised fund. He probably would have had another $500,000 in his pocket just from tax savings. Which, again, Cameron, I know $500,000 is not a big deal for you, but that's a lot of money.
Cameron just calls it walking around.
That's true. That's walking around.
That's right.
That's a big deal, and most people just don't know to do that, to give before a sale. And so, I mean, we can say this pre-sale, gift, strategy, those things. It really is important because most advisors aren't giving that advice. Most CPAs, attorneys are not giving that advice. True. And so being able to say, hey, let's think about this before you sell something is really, really important.
Yeah. And that's a shocking thing for me, is that, you know, we have that experience from time to time where, you know, we're kind of always connecting to new people. We're always trying to stay like in front of the right group of people. But then from time to time, we'll get that inbound from somebody that says, oh, I need an advisor. I just sold my business, right? So a few different examples of that. We had somebody that, you know, they sold their business for a gross of 60. Each partner ended up with $30 million. So on the deal side, they probably paid a deal attorney $100,000 to maybe $500,000. And that deal attorney never walked him down the hall to the tax group and said, is there anything we should be doing? The CPA who they were talking to never said, hey, before you sell, you should think about X, Y, Z. And so it is this thing where it's like there's a unique spot that needs to be filled on that team. And you might have the most expert M&A attorney. You might have the most expert CPA. But if you're not asking the question or they're not asking the question, it's just like a blind spot. And there's no malicious intent. But it is just like you kind of see it time and time again where it's just like if you don't have the right voice in the room, it becomes a problem.
Yeah. I had it makes me think about, I had a friend of mine who I went to law school with, and he became a financial advisor. And I'm like, why'd you become a financial advisor? And he goes, Evan, the attorney that cares the most for their client is not equivalent to the advisor that cares the least for their client. and so I said, oh,
glad
wow.
you said it.
Yeah, I'm like, there's a shot on lawyers across. But it was such a good point because a lot of those the deal attorney, they're there to get the deal done. The CPA is just to think about taxes for the deal typically. And very rarely.
And the deal attorneys, like it's a nightmare. Like the deals that they put together. This is not like a walk in the park rubber stamp. There's a lot of technical that goes into it.
There is.
And so they are like herding cats, right?
Yeah.
So like we work with people that are going through exits all the time, and it's like if you have an entrepreneur that's going through an exit, like nothing else matters, like that, right? And so those deal attorneys, they're working, they're up to their eyeballs in alligators, and they're not thinking, oh, maybe we should ask him if he wants to save some money on taxes. So,
Well, a quick shout out to the CPAs and attorneys who are good and do that.
Yeah.
You are out there as well. So thank you.
You know
for
what they
being
say,
strategic,
Evan, right?
But they're not as common.
90% of attorneys give 10% a bad name.
There you go. There you go. Well, the 10%, hit like or subscribe on the podcast so that way we'll hit you up. I mean, that it is there's very few, and I think some of it is really, and I'll give you an example. I had a donor I was working with, great guy, husband and wife. This guy was just stoic, like he was a construction guy. He built a bunch of stuff. He was selling basically some real estate, but it was all within LLCs. And I was sitting at this conference room table, and him and his wife are on one side, and all of his tax advisors are all on the other. And I'm kind of sitting at like the foot of the table and kind of watching this. And the CPAs are there, and they got all these papers out, and they're showing them, hey, you can only gift, $1 million. Max gift $1.5 million out of this. And they're going through all their charts and all the things. And he's just sitting there, just mad. And I mean, I can just see him. He's just sitting there, just mad, looking at. And I go, hang on, time out, guys. How much do you want to give away? He goes, well, I wanted to give away $2 million. And literally, the CPA took the piece of paper and just ripped it in half. He goes, okay, give away $2 million. Right. It's the first time that somebody asked him,
oh my goodness,
what do you want to do?
We could go down a rabbit trail.
Oh, yeah. But I think that's where it is on all this stuff. To have somebody, and again, if you probably have a great attorney, whoever's listening to this, you probably have a great tax advisor. But having somebody that is forward-looking, hey, what do you care about? What are your goals? Not just right now, not just the business sale, not just this real estate transaction, but what are your long-term goals? And I have lots of M&A friends, and I've told them, you have a checklist that you're going through. Put on that checklist to ask the client, are you charitably inclined? Because if the answer is yes, it's like the old choose your own adventure books. You remember those books? I love those books. I always died in those books. But it's if you choose that adventure of charitable giving, it's stop, go to page 72 and go call somebody to say, hey, how do I do this?
Right. And really I think it probably is good to pause. When we've talked about pre-sale gifts of business, you've alluded to real estate, but that is also absolutely makes sense as well, right? You can gift real estate to these donor advised funds. And so let's talk through a couple of key details. Let's say someone's listening going, oh, I do own a business and I do want to sell next year. Like, when do I need to start thinking about it? When do I need to start taking steps, because it's not something you do in the 11th hour the day before the sale. So let's talk about that from a timing standpoint.
Sure.
And except for that's when most people think about it, is in the 11th hour.
That's true, and it often happens in the 11th hour. If we can avoid that, that's great.
We got one of those in the hopper right now.
That's right. I mean, I know I file my taxes on January 15th. When do you guys file your taxes? That's right. I mean, no one thinks about these things until it is the 11th hour. But just a little bit of forethought if you can. To think about this. So, and we'll hit a little bit of the entities because that's an important thing with this too. So, but if you're going to do a pre-sale gift of real estate or business interest, basically privately held assets that are not publicly traded, you have to complete the charitable gift before there's a binding obligation to sell that asset. So what is a binding obligation? That's a little bit of a gray area. So this is where lawyers make money, is in the gray. I've had clients that have made gifts of business interest on December 31st in the morning, and in the afternoon they signed a sale purchase agreement. That's a little close for me.
Truly the 11th hour.
That is a little close for me. But then I've had other donors say, hey, I want to do a gift of my company before there is a letter of intent that is involved. A letter of intent typically in a business sale transaction is non-binding. It usually is the last paragraph of the letter that says this is non-binding, other than the non-disclosure provisions and privacy provisions. So It really depends on that. For real estate transactions, it's a little bit easier. Typically, if there's a real estate contract, the contract is usually binding on one party, but not the other party. So usually the buyer has outs to get out of it. But usually the seller is kind of stuck, and the seller is the one doing the gift. So I would typically say, hey, before you have a real estate contract in place, you probably should have the gift completed. Typically. Now, I've seen it done before. And it really is just kind of, it's a gray area. I used to tell my old tax law professor, he would say, there is no black and white answer. It's just arguments. There's good arguments and there's bad arguments. And so you might have some better arguments if you do it sooner rather than later.
So, and there are times, we should say there are times where gifts are not ideal. Right. So like we've had a few, like one thing I think to keep an eye out for or think about in particular, if you've done alternative investments, private equity, private real estate, venture capital, there are times where, you get wind that there's a deal in play, deal in motion. You could actually do a pre-sale gift of your limited partnership interest. You do however, there are times where those have carried out net operating losses. Right. So if your taxes have benefited from a net operating loss on some of those entities, then all of a sudden they are not good gifts, pre-sale gifts from a charitable standpoint. And so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll work with the CPA or work with a tax attorney to literally do like a asset by asset analysis when that information comes in. So if you're an investor in alternatives, if you're an investor in limited partnerships and one of those is getting ready to sell, it might be a great asset for a pre-sale gift. It might be a bad one, but that's literally like hand-to-hand combat a little bit of like figuring out like what were the net operating losses that flew out, when were they taken, all those kind of things.
For sure. So, and this goes into, the asset selection. What asset should I give away? Obviously, the most appreciated ones. Does it have debt on it? Is there, what's the timing of this? If I've only owned this for 6 months, not a good charitable gift. You're really looking for long-term capital gain assets, things like that, which is really important.
Yeah. So we have a family we work with that. He's been in the business for 20 years, 30 years, and when we started working with him 6 years ago, it was just an operating business that he was the majority owner in, and it had not net operating losses, and it wasn't a very good gift. Well, fast forward 5 or 6 years, and now we're getting less into like, is this just a good gift, to like, actually we're implementing some succession planning, right? So all of a sudden it went from not a good thing to put in a donor advised fund, not a good thing to make a charitable gift with, to like, as a part of his succession plan, now we're making a charitable gift. So it is this thing where it's like, just because an asset's not right today doesn't mean it's not right forever. So it is just like, that's where the nerds really make their money, because they dig in and start looking at K1s and basis and that kind of thing.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I think we've beat upon the point that a pre-sale gift is highly advantageous, and if you have highly appreciated assets, businesses, particularly real estate, et cetera, venture capital, private equity, great opportunities to at least examine a pre-sale gift. So now we're going to flip and say, okay, so the gift has been made. Or actually, let me take one step back.
Let me take. Hasn't been made yet.
The gift is like
in contemplation.
Yeah, you think, yes, this is the right move for me. I care. I really want to give this. We then kind of have to kind of think about the entity selection. So Evan, you dove into donor advised fund a little earlier. That is one of maybe 4, maybe 5 charitable structures that could be the right fit. So John, I can tell you want to.
Well, just from a standpoint of like in financial planning, we talk about entities all the time, right? So specifically what we're talking about, what we're getting ready to talk about here, what I think we're heading down is like, we're talking about charitable structures, things that are on the charitable side of the ledger. And so the entity selection part, as a donor, you get to decide where that gift's going. So we're going to dive in here to some very exciting and technical information.
Oh, okay. Well, I will do my best. Thanks for really setting me up for success on that one.
Take it away.
I do.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I've worked in this world in the donor advised fund. We talked about it. That's one of the vehicles. But I've had other people say, well, can't I just give this to my church? I only give to my church. Can I just give some S Corp stock to my church? I go, yeah, sure. And that church is going to hate you because they're going to now have to file a 990T and pay UBIT taxes on that, even if it's a church.
Oh, he brought up UBIT.
Yeah, there you go. Now we're having
this is getting real.
These are taxes that charities have to pay if it's unrelated to their business.
Yeah.
And I love talking to ministries because when I speak to ministries, presentations, I'll say, how many of you received real estate gifts? And you'll see a couple hands get up, and I go, all right, now how many of you received 2 real estate gifts? And those hands go down because usually when a ministry says, yeah, we'll take real estate, or a nonprofit, it's terrible. It's not a good experience for them because they're not prepared to handle those things. And so this is really where you want to look at these third-party kind of groups or different vehicles that can help facilitate the charitable gifts. So a donor-advised fund is one of those. It's a very simple tool. It's the fastest growing charitable vehicle in the nation, and there's lots of them out there. So the ones we've talked about, Signatory, National Christian Foundation, these are faith-based donor-advised funds. There's community foundations that also are available, but then there's also large institutional donor-advised funds that, financial institutions have their own donor-advised funds. So there's lots to pick from that standpoint. Very simple, very easy. All donor-advised funds are public charities, and the real key there is that public charity status is the maximum tax benefit whenever you donate an asset. So when I donate an asset to a public charity, that's where I get that fair market value tax deduction, and the public charity avoids the capital gain. Conversely, if you look at a private foundation, now this is the one we always think about. Hey, the Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation, these big private foundations, these are great too. And there's really a good reason for those foundations. But the tax treatment is a little bit less favorable. For certain assets like business interests, those things, the tax deduction typically is your cost basis. So if I start a business for nothing and sell it for $100 million and I donate it to my private foundation, my tax deduction is 0. So not a great from a tax standpoint from a deduction. Now, the private foundation, again, they're still a tax exempt organization, so they'll still avoid some taxes on that as well.
And if you might be thinking, oh, well, I could gift it to a donor advised fund and then shift it over to a private foundation.
Yeah, you can't.
That is also a no-go.
You can't do that. So a donor advised fund is restricted from giving to certain organizations. So they can only give to public charities. They cannot give to private foundations, cannot give to individuals, things like that. And technically, when you give to a donor advised fund, it's legally the donor advised fund organizations. They own it. The donor retains a right to recommend grants to the donor advised fund, which most donor advised funds all follow those grants and those recommendations. But it is helpful to think about, if I look at donor advised funds on one side of the ledger, you give up some control for the tax benefits. On the other side is private foundations, where you have the most control, but you give up some of the tax benefits. Now, there is some of these entities that are kind of in between. One of those is called a supporting organization, which is a separate entity that looks very similar to a private foundation, but it has public charity status still because it supports another public charity. That's a great vehicle. It's not for everybody. And so each of these these entity selections are really important. And so when I talk to families and they're saying, hey, I want to start it, 20 years ago in the practice of law, like it was charitable remainder trust or private foundation. Which one would you like today? Like these are the menu options. Well, now there's all these menu options that are available within donor advised funds and those things. And so really looking at a private foundation, these are really for individuals that need the most control. Maybe the tax benefits are not the most important, but we're going to be granting, scholarships to individuals at this alma mater. I want to control it. I want to determine where it goes, how it goes. I also want to employ my kids, my grandkids. You can do that all through a private foundation. The donor advised fund, you can do a lot of the same things as a private foundation, but it is a fraction of the cost. There's no setup cost typically. It's just simply opening an account at one of these organizations and you're off and running. And sometimes people say, well, what if I'm giving a lot of money away through a donor advised fund? Should I really have a private foundation? Not necessarily. I work with families that give tens of millions of dollars, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars away every year through a donor advised fund. And it's very simple, very easy for them to use. And because they really want to give money out to ministries and nonprofits. And what's another kind of aspect is, although a private foundation says it's private, it's not. A private foundation, you can go online, find exactly how much assets are within a private foundation, where that private foundation is granted to. All the 990 PFs, that's the tax return that a private foundation has to file. Those are all public. On a donor advised fund, the public charity of the donor advised fund files a 990, but where your individual donor advised fund grants to, that's totally anonymous. So there is kind of an anonymity aspect, which is really nice. So, yeah. You could get me going. I could just keep talking on this, guys.
This is some good stuff. The other, one of the interesting things is 20 years ago, basically the rule of thumb was if you're going to have more than $1 million in a charitable vehicle of some sort, then you look at a private foundation, right? And then it's gone from $1 million to now some people say $10 million, but really, like, when we start thinking about when do you start looking at a private foundation, when do you start, it's probably more like in that $20 million threshold. And part of it is just like the opportunity cost. Like there are some cost benefits of using a private foundation. The other thing that's interesting is you can use some of these things in concert, right? So you can gift from a private foundation to a donor advised fund, right? So there are these times where, like, we're essentially building these hybrid models where it's sometimes it's an SO and a donor advised fund, maybe it's a private foundation, a donor advised fund. So there is kind of this hybrid model, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. And it can actually be like on an annual basis or on an asset by asset basis, where it's like, hey, if you're getting ready to sell a piece of real estate, or if you're getting ready to sell a business, then we could literally decide, like, okay, does that go into your donor advised fund or does that go into your private foundation? So you can use some of these things in concert.
Yeah, for sure. And you can have multiple donor advised funds, and you can, I mean, there's lots of different combinations as you would. And it's interesting, John, I've seen definitely the two parallel path of private foundations and donor advised funds. At least 2 times that I've seen that, the private foundation ends up just shutting down and they give it all to the donor advised fund because they're like, this thing sucks. This is really hard to operate and maintain. And this over here is so easy. We just get to do the fun part of giving the money away, which is really what we want to see happen.
A small detail about the donor advised funds, which we really haven't covered yet, is if you're about to sell your business, you make a big gift, but you haven't really done that charitable design work. And so you're like, I'm not exactly sure how I want to give this away. Do I want it to be more of an endowment model? Do I want it to just be kind of a funnel out to charities? There is no rush once it's in the donor advised fund, right? It can sit in the donor advised fund. It can be invested in public securities. It can be invested in venture capital, private equity, other things, and it can grow. So there's a lot of optionality there. Now, some of that can happen in the private foundation as well, but I know they have kind of a 5% rule. You got to start giving it out. So just another benefit of the donor advised fund if that aligns with your family.
The nice thing about the donor advised fund is it is immediate, right? So there's times where we're meeting with a client and we're talking about charitable giving, and we'll open the donor advised fund in 5 minutes while they're sitting in our office, right? So it's just like that quick. Compared to, you might talk about some of the technical sides of, like, launching those other entities. So with both a private foundation and a supporting organization, you are creating a state entity, either a nonprofit corporation or a nonprofit or a charitable trust. Then you have to go get tax exempt status for that entity, filing a 1023, and all of that, frankly, takes time and usually attorneys or CPA to file that for you. So it really adds up from a cost standpoint. There's ongoing cost as far as filing those tax returns each year. With the donor advised fund, you don't have any of that. You're right. You open it up,
you put money into it, you're done. Like, give it out like whenever you want. It's pretty simple and easy from that standpoint.
And there are times, even like we have a couple of really good friends that have started public charities, public nonprofits, just because that aligned with more of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So there is like the entire spectrum that's available to you.
Yeah.
It's just like, again, it's kind of like anything that we talk about. It's like the sooner you start planning for it, the more your options are, right?
Yeah.
So it is like if it's December 30th and we think there's going to be a contract in our business on January 1, we're probably using a DAF, right?
Yes.
And then like, but if it's 2 years out, or if it's like all of a sudden, like we have lots of optionality, because like one of the timeline just on something like a private foundation, like we were just researching this the other day, is that I think that the stated timeline by the IRS, or people that work with the IRS, is about 9 months now from the filing date to the time that you get your grant or your approval letter from the IRS. I have a friend that his ministry, it was actually 18 months from the time we filed his 1023 until the time it was approved was 18 months. And so in that window, you're in this really weird limbo.
Yeah.
And so that, it's called pending status.
Yeah.
And you can make gifts and you can do things, but it's a little bit risky.
Yeah.
So what we would prefer to do is, get things set up, have it approved, have it all ready to go, so that when you're ready to do something with it, it's available. Like this is, when you're trying to rush and the IRS is one of the parties, it usually doesn't go well.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, in anything in life, if you are rushing planning, it's not great. I went on a fishing trip last year to Canada. It was like June. I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's going to be easy. I had shorts, t-shirt on the first day we got up there. And this is like a canoe in, camp for 5 days.
Yeah.
It snowed.
Oh, yeah. No,
but all I was thinking of is catching fish. That's all I wanted to do is catch the fish.
Yeah.
Same thing. I mean, it's like, oh, well, I should do this. And you go down this path and you really haven't done the harder work, which is like, okay, let's plan and think ahead.
Yeah.
And, and I'm a big advocate for advisors, for somebody to come alongside you to kind of work through, okay, well, have you thought about this?
Yeah.
You said you wanted a private foundation, but it sounds like you really need this. But all that takes time, and you have to think through a little bit, and to have a partner walk through, with you on that sort of thing. So.
And some of the interesting part that, again, like we did one earlier on kind of the heart side of giving, and what we're talking about today is a little more technical, but then there are times where these two things kind of converge, right? And that's really kind of around, for lack of a better term, and this is a very exciting podcast. We're going to use terms like governance, right? So like governance is really like how are decisions made? What is the entity structure? What are those kind of things? So if you have the right family and there's really enough people and they have an interest, from a governance standpoint, like our experience is like the governance could almost work the exact same whether you're using a donor advised fund or a private foundation. Not really from a technical standpoint, but like the donor advised funds that we have helped set up and the organizations we work with, like we say that we're going to basically set up a granting committee in the family, and then that one person from the granting committee is really the advisor on the donor advised fund. But just talk a little bit about kind of that governance side of things. And there's kind of two sides. There's the technical aspect of it, but then there's really like, how do we as a family make decisions? So like, again, like kind of these things start to converge, the technical and the hard side.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because you have the both and. So I mean, like I sat on it was a kind of a private foundation board, and it was a really cool private foundation. The patriarch kind of set it up. Matriarch was really the heart of the family, and she was the one that really drove this foundation, which was so cool. They had one son. They had a grants committee. They had a pretty good-sized board with outside family members, and it was very faith-centered. I mean, they really pretty much only gave to Christian causes. They had values for the foundation. They had the mission of the foundation. So I felt like, hey, we had pretty good governance.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the matriarch got cancer, passed away very quickly. The next board meeting, it wasn't like a year or 2 years after. It was the next board meeting. The son stands up and says, hey, we're going to add a fifth value to this. And I go, okay. And I'm looking around. Well, this fifth value was a hard left turn from where the matriarch was at. I mean, and I thought, oh my goodness, I can see where the writing on the wall. Well, guess what? The next grant that was recommended by him was something that she would have never granted to.
Right.
And it was tough because in that family structure, there really was only one son, and then there was non-family members. And so a lot of you're like, there wasn't a document that said, hey, we're not going to grant.
There wasn't a guardrail. There weren't guardrails. There
wasn't.
Yeah, that's right.
There wasn't. It was just always assumed like, well, this is how this goes.
My son knows what I want.
That's right.
Yeah.
It feels good right now.
Yeah.
But in reality, like that foundation, yeah, it was anything goes. Yeah, there were no guardrails.
Yeah.
And so as soon as the driver changed, that road went a different direction.
Yeah.
And it was really unfortunate. And I mean, even having to like recuse myself from a board, which was really a sad thing. So with a private foundation, you really have to be careful with it. So to put in those governance, to put in those things in place, because it can shift just with the next generation, or just the next leadership or those things, especially if this is a larger foundation. With a donor advised fund, you have a little bit of built-in guardrails anyway. I mean, a Christian donor advised fund group is typically going to have restrictions on giving to non-Christian or anti-Christian organizations.
Yep.
And so there are, because it's a public charity and you have less control, you already have a little bit of that built in. Now, that being said, I think that every family needs to have those guardrails. I worked with a family, awesome guy. He was a big hunter, loved the Lord, was a great guy. He had in his documents, do not give, and I'm sorry, I'm going to give this on the air, so I apologize. This is not me, this is somebody else. He says, do not give any of my money to Ducks Unlimited. He goes, I hate that organization. Now, why Ducks Unlimited? Seems like a fine organization. I have no passing judgment. But he was like very clear, don't give to Ducks Unlimited. Well, I wish that a lot of people that were in these giving conversations were that clear about it, because most of the time it is, well, I don't know, just you'll make up. You know where I like to give.
Johnny will make a good decision.
That's right. So, So those governance conversations, I think it is hey, be very clear in documents and think through, where do I want to give? But then also I like the highway. If you think of the highway, you're going fast, you're going in the right direction. It's I-70, you're going right to Colorado. Where are your passions? Where do you want to give? We talked about that in the last podcast of like, that's like putting those in writings. Hey, our family, we give to these organizations. Here's why. Because this was really impactful to me. I think it was really important too.
I think also it is an ongoing process, right? Things do change over time. It can't just, it's a little bit like an estate plan. You can't just do it once when you're 30 and then set it on the shelf and be like, oh, it's fine. It's like, no, things change over time. And so it is this kind of ongoing evaluation of like, have things shifted? Do these still stand for where we are? I mean, it's just, it's a process that you can't do once and be done.
I had this is a real quick story just because it's funny. This lady, she in her estate plan, she gifted basically everything to charity, and it was like 10 charities. And those 10 charities changed every 6 months. So she was constantly updating the estate plan because it was like, well, Salvation Army, you're out. Okay, next month, Salvation Army, you're back in. But the way she did it is because, and this is for all the ministry listeners out there, if she did not get a thank you letter for her lifetime gifts, they were cut out. They were cut out of the estate plan. And this was it was a sweet story because I don't think she was a major donor. But her estate was several millions of dollars. So these ministries that were on the list, they got a really good chunk. Maybe not in the lifetime, but it's it's one of those. The estate plan changes for everybody's preferences.
Well, that's, I think, another thing from a technical standpoint. A lot of times why we like donor advised funds, why we like private foundations, donor advised funds in particular, is that you can make charitable gifts within your estate plan. And so it just makes things really easy. So there are times where we'll say, in a client's documents, we'll recommend, hey, let's say whatever, 10%, 20%, 30% to your donor advised fund. And then within your donor advised fund, it's really easy to make distributions out there because it's literally a giving memo. So like your estate plan requires an attorney and drafting and those types of things, whereas a lot of times your DAF governance is like super easy.
Yeah.
So it is like, again, like I think there's this threshold, and there's not like a perfect as to like when you cross over from when I should use a donor advised fund, when I should use a private foundation. That's more of the art of it. That's not really the science part of the planning.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why you need people to come alongside you to ask the hard questions and figure it out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Evan, thank you once again. John, glad you're here. Thanks for wading into the details with us today. Again, there's a lot more here, but hopefully that was a helpful overview in some of the technical side of presale gifts as well as kind of charitable entities. And if you have any questions, please reach out. We'd love to help, love to engage. If you've stuck around this long, love it if you like the podcast, share it with a friend. And appreciate your time.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Cam.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us on the StoryLens Podcast. If you're navigating complex financial decisions, we're here to help. We know your story is anything but ordinary, and that's why we start there, because the right solutions are as unique as you are.
StoryOne Family Office, LLC, or StoryOne is a registered investment advisor, RIA, registered with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Registration as an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and the content of this communication has not been approved or verified by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission or by any state securities authority. StoryOne renders individualized investment advice to persons in a particular state only after complying with the state's regulatory requirements or pursuant to an applicable state exemption or exclusion. All investments carry risk, and no investment strategy can guarantee a profit or protect from loss of capital. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor shall this be construed as advice for the financial needs of any individual. StoryOne is not permitted to offer, and no statements made during this podcast should constitute legal or tax advice. The information contained herein has been compiled by independent third parties, have been obtained from sources who are believed to be reliable. However, accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by StoryOne.